Let us pray. May the words of my mouth, meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. As we've just heard in the translation of these verses from the Message, the Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. Throughout this Advent season, we have been considering the ways in which God draws near. God moves into this very neighborhood. So this evening, I want to encourage us to take the next step. I invite you to imagine it with me. It was just a small house at the end of the cul-de-sac. A for sale sign stuck like a flag decorated the front yard. The owner had moved to Florida, and it was obvious that she wasn't coming back. Weeds covered the flower beds, blades of grass stuck up at odd angles around the posts of the white picket fence. The young man being paid to keep an eye on the place came to cut the grass every now and then, but he never bothered to weed or edge or trim. It had been a nice little house at one time, but no doubt now it was unoccupied. Then early one fall morning, a neighbor taking her morning walk noticed curtains in the living room window of the small house. She'd been busy, must have missed someone moving in. There was a light in the front room. There appeared to be someone sitting there. She paused just a moment. But she had breakfast to make, lunches to pack, book bags to inspect, outfits to iron. Before she walked out the door to take the kids to school, she had to find time to take a shower and get ready herself. After church, she had to pick up the kids from after-school care, supervise homework, get to soccer practice on time, make dinner, and get everyone to bed. She really needed to go to the grocery store. When was she going to fit that in? Oh, and her daughter's project for school was due tomorrow. So instead of stopping to look, she picked up the pace and headed for home. It wasn't long before the leaves on the hillside behind the small house began to change. The hill had been bathed in a deep green all summer, but now it looked like someone had splashed the hillside with vivid oranges and vibrant yellows and deep reds. No one could remember it ever looking so beautiful. In front of the house, there were flowers that now seemed to match the hillside behind. The grass had all been trimmed away from the pickets on the fence, and they'd been freshly painted. Someone said they'd seen a man working in the yard of the little house. He appeared to be middle-aged, wore a tan shirt and jeans. He waved as they turned around in the cul-de-sac, but whoever it was hadn't stopped to say hello. A little past 7 each morning, the neighborhood children gathered in front of the little house at the end of the cul-de-sac to wait for the school bus. Girls on one side of the driveway and boys on the other. The girls huddled together, often giggling and sometimes pointing at a teen star's picture in a magazine. The boys found their way to the other side of the driveway, where they occupied each other by hitting themselves on each other's shoulders and devising obstacle courses with their book bags. One day the man came out of his house and stood on the porch watching the children. And one of the boys looked and saw the man, noticed his kind eyes and friendly face, and so the boy lifted his hand in a wave. But just then, the bus turned into the cul-de-sac. The children all scrambled for their belongings. And as the bus began to pull away, the boy looked out the window just in time to see the man close the door of the small house behind him. Near the center of this little village, there's a small restaurant. About 8 o'clock in the morning, a group of men arrived for coffee. Sitting around the counter, they talked politics and the new traffic light at the corner of 5th and Main. From the other end of the counter, another man says that he thought the leaves were particularly pretty behind the hillside this year. I hear someone's living in the little house at the end of the street, said the waitress, and everyone nodded their heads. It's got the place looking nice, came a reply. Anybody know his name? The coffee grew cold. The old men gradually left. Lunch brought a completely different crowd to the restaurant. This time, shopkeepers and lawyers from the courthouse and small business owners made their way into the restaurant about noon. Sitting around the red and white checkerboard tablecloths, they mostly ate in silence, reading the paper or trying to figure it out and how they were going to make it through the next month. A bell jingled and the door opened. A man wearing jeans and a tan shirt came in and made his way to a corner booth. A few of the regulars looked up from their plates or paper, briefly nodded, and went back to their lunch. A few weeks later, a son came to visit his mother. It's been 6 weeks since the young man's father had died quite unexpectedly. That was the last time he'd been home. It was hard to get away with his job, managing the plant, his wife working shift work at the hospital, the kids being busy every weekend. Last time he talked to his mom, though, on the phone, she sounded distant, so he got in the car and he drove home. As he turned into the driveway, he looked up at the hillside at the end of the cul-de-sac, and he was overwhelmed by the colors. He made a mental note to ask his mother about the house at the base of the hill. Stepping up on the porch, he rang the doorbell and waited. No one came to the door. He rang the bell again. Still no movement in the house. Getting worried, he fumbled around for his key. He opened the door and went inside. Calling for his mother, he found her sitting at the kitchen table. "Mom, why didn't you come to the door?" he asked. "Oh," she replied, "I thought you were someone else." "Who else, Mom?" "Well, there's this man who lives at the end of the street," she said. "He comes by a few times, but I don't know him, so I don't go to the door. He just waits on the porch for a few minutes. Then he'll get the hose and water the flowers. They seem to be growing nicely this year, but I don't know him. I don't go to the door." It wasn't long before the colors on the hillside began to fade. The wind grew chill and the days grew short. No one was quite sure when it happened. No moving truck in the cul-de-sac. But one day the curtains and the windows were gone. The flowers had died. The weeds threatened to overtake the beds again. The small house at the end of the street was empty once more. The Word was in the world. The world was there through Him. And yet the world didn't even notice. God moved into the neighborhood and no one even noticed. Could it happen exactly that way? Tonight, my friends, here on Christmas Eve, we rejoice that God is here. God has moved into the neighborhood, into this neighborhood. So let us not be just the big steeple church on Walton Way that people drive by and wonder what goes on in there. No, there are those in this neighborhood too busy to come inside. Let's go out and meet them where they are. There are children engaged in other things. Let us go out and invite them in. There are conversations that run from the weather to how our business will survive. Let us go out and join those conversations. There are those who grieve with such despair that they cannot open their doors. Let us go out and comfort them. Yes, God moved into the neighborhood this Christmas and in the new year to come. Let us, as the hands and feet of Christ, move into this neighborhood as well. Thanks be to God. Amen.